New Yorker at heart. I grew up in Greenwich Village, home of perhaps the most famous or infamous Halloween parade in the world. It's really more like street theater than a parade, and back in the 1980s when I was a kid, queer people especially embraced that Halloween parade as a forum for creative expression. I remember some of my friends in high school being surprised that I was allowed to go watch the parade, but it never seemed to me like the kind of thing I should need to be protected from. Outrageous behavior, elaborate costumes that flout social norms. To me, it was all part of the great creative expression of humanity. It's an example of the freedom of expression that is protected in the First Amendment of our Constitution. I'm a huge believer in free speech. I've been a member of something called the American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLU, since I graduated from college. The mission of the ACLU is to defend the right of freedom of speech. When a person has been denied their freedom of speech and can't afford a lawyer, the ACLU will often take their case for free. Now, it's easy for me to support the ACLU when they defend something that I think makes our society better. For example, the organization brought the first federal civil rights case about discrimination against gay and lesbian public school teachers who, in the 70s, could be fired in many places if anyone learned their identity. But what about when the ACLU defends something that I don't think makes our society better? Many people know that I'm an advocate of laws that would prevent gun violence. These are often called gun control laws, and I personally would like to see our society enact more of them. So how did I feel when the ACLU decided to support the litigation efforts of a pro-gun rights organization? At first I raised an eyebrow. They're taking the side of those guys? Then I learned about the case, and I changed my mind. A man in Washington State went into his local public library, sat down at a computer, and tried to look up a pro-gun website. The page was blocked. When he asked, the librarian refused to unblock it. I don't like pro-gun websites. I don't believe they make our society better. But the ACLU took that case because of their belief that information should be free. The library is a government service, and government has no business telling adults what they should and should not, what they can and cannot look up on a computer at the library. So as much as I work in my life outside of St. Luke's to get my legislators to pass stricter gun control laws, I also support the ACLU defending the right of someone I really disagree with to have free access to information. There are some cases, though, that test even my commitment to freedom of speech. The best example is a case you might be familiar with. In 1977, a group of American Nazis asked the town of Skokie, Indiana, for a permit to have a march. More than half of Skokie's population was Jewish, including many Holocaust survivors. Understandably, they wanted to stop this hateful march from happening. They denied the permit. The ACLU took the side of the marchers, arguing that even appalling and deeply disturbing viewpoints are still speech protected by the First Amendment. This past summer, we saw ugly scenes that reminded me of Skokie. White nationalists marched in Charlottesville, carrying tiki torches and displaying symbols like swastikas. My first naive thought was, wait, we still have Nazis? And apparently, this is the kind of moment the internet was made for, because it wasn't long before someone on Twitter clarified, quote, "You can't be both a Nazi and a proud American," he tweeted. "We literally had a war about this. The whole world was involved." I loved that. But of course, to be clear, from a legal standpoint, You can be both a Nazi and an American. The ACLU defends the right of even so-called American Nazis, a morally indefensible group, but entitled nonetheless to legal protection. Freedom of speech, of course, has its limits, the most famous example being that you can't yell "fire" in a crowded movie theater when there is no fire. That speech is not protected because people would stampede the exits and it could cause physical harm. College campuses are awash right now in debates about free speech. If something is offensive and unpopular, is it dangerous? Can hateful speech cause harm? This is not a new debate, but it seems to have come to the forefront in new and vivid ways, and as college-bound students, this is something you'll need to think about. What does freedom of speech mean in schools? Although the courts have answered that question to a large extent in public schools, their answers don't offer us in a private school a lot of guidance. We, as a community, need to make those determinations. What kinds of speech should be allowed? What kinds of speech, if any, should not? When I think about this, I'm reminded of a time that I myself was in high school. It was the spring of my junior year. I was very involved in the school literary magazine, and 16-year-old me got into a fierce debate with the faculty advisor of the Lit Mag. The debate was about censorship. We had a short story we wanted to publish. The short story contained the word bitch. He said we had to take the word out. His reason was simple. It's a swear word. It's offensive. I was pretty annoyed by this, but I didn't see a way around it. I had given him my best argument. I'd been overruled. We took the word out. We published the magazine. About the same time we published this Lit Mag free of swear words, our school also published a yearbook with the usual page of senior superlatives. As it happened, my boyfriend at the time was in that graduating class, so of course when I got the yearbook, I turned first to see his page with his pictures and his quotes, and then to the superlatives. Next to other people's superlatives, things like always late to class or most likely to succeed, was his. It read, "He likes big girls." Even though I don't have a copy of that yearbook, I haven't seen it in 25 years. If I close my eyes, I can still picture that double-page spread, the little neat font spelling out the news that I was fat. So which is more damaging? A swear word included as part of dialogue in a short story, or senior superlatives published under the pretense of being funny? I knew immediately, of course, what I needed to do. I needed to be able to laugh at it, to be cool with it, to diminish its power by being on the side of the jokers rather than the target of the joke. Or perhaps I needed to develop a thicker skin, laugh it off, call the people who wrote that jerks, and move on. I imagined in the swiftness of my moving on, in the forcefulness of my show of being unconcerned, I would communicate that I was strong, that their words had no power. But here's the thing, their words did have power. And the fact that I felt hurt and embarrassed was not a sign of my weakness. After all, I wasn't some kind of special snowflake that needed protecting from any little slight. I had a lot of confidence when I was 16 years old. I was an athlete, I was an actress, I was a leader in my school, I was a good friend, and let's not underestimate this, I was a native New Yorker through and through. A strong feminist, even back then, I was the one advocating for including the word bitch in the literary magazine, a word that to this day I loathe. I loathe it with the intensity of 1,000 suns because of how it punishes a woman, not for her actions, but for her gender. But despite my personal feelings about that word, I don't think anyone, not my peers in high school, not you today, needs to be protected from swear words in literature. I mean, after all, if freedom of speech applies anywhere in schools, surely it applies in the arts. But when it comes to the words we use to and about one another, we need a much higher standard than freedom of speech. We need a moral compass. What I needed was somebody, some student on the yearbook staff, to see that superlative and flag it. Hey, guys, are we publishing this? It seems kind of mean. That's it. That's all it would have taken. Once one person isn't cool with something, it forces a choice. And more often than not, in my experience, people want to do the right thing. They need a little encouragement. Yeah, I noticed that one too. Let's take it out. I went on to become, as it turned out, the faculty advisor to more than one high school yearbook. Wearing that hat, I came to see how easily something mean could make it into print. With hundreds of pages and thousands of words to proofread, no faculty advisor will ever catch every reference and innuendo. Sorry, Mr. James. If you want to sneak something a little insulting into a yearbook, you probably can. In and out of school, there's no shortage of opportunity to cut someone down, to insult in a way that can always dart behind the universal defense of bullies. It was just a joke. The ACLU advocates freedom of speech, robust freedom of speech for everyone. And in the context of a healthy democracy, I wholeheartedly endorse that position, even when it's hard for me to tolerate the outcome. But I would consider freedom of speech to be only the starting point for determining whether to say something. A better test than can I say this is, should I? How might my words affect others? I would ask that we hold in our mind these two ideas. Freedom of speech is necessary for a healthy democracy, and a moral compass demands that we consider how our words will affect others. As we grow up, each of us has to decide how to live. My high school, in some ways, put too much emphasis on following a rule about swear words and not enough emphasis on following a moral compass. That pair of school publications has remained an important touchstone for me. Several years ago, during Spirit Week here at St. Luke's, one of the themes was Career Day. A group of students came up the path toward the main entrance, and they were wearing sweatpants and t-shirts and had kind of messy, disheveled hair. "What are you dressed as?" I asked with a smile. "We're homeless people," they exclaimed. These were good kids. These were nice kids. Their answer troubled me. It suggested a real misunderstanding about what homelessness is. Because I cared about them, I pulled them aside. I asked them how they had chosen that costume. They said they hadn't thought a lot about it. It just seemed funny. I asked them to think for a moment about what it would actually feel like to be without a home. One student asked me, "Is there some kind of rule against being homeless for a costume?" And I'm grateful to that student because the question pinpoints the issue. There's not a rule, and we're not going to make one. There's a moral compass, mine, yours, and ours. Together, we're going to have conversations about the effects of our choices. In the Halloween parade in Greenwich Village, nobody establishes a rule for what you can and cannot wear. I hope you'll all go to that parade one day because it might just blow your minds. Freedom of expression matters, and I believe in it. I invite you to look not toward the rules, but inward, toward your own moral compass when you are making decisions, even very small ones, whether it's a costume, a senior superlative, a text message, or just a comment. The power to build our community is in our hands. Thank you.